beautiful Orc Maiden rejected by everyone, dreamed only of having a family. The first thing they took from Grucka was her name. Not violently, not with ceremony, just the slow erosion of a thing repeated wrongly so many times that the original sound faded like a campfire left too long unattended. In the village of Thornmere, where the market stalls sold dried riverfish in clay pots and occasionally a half-decent sword, the humans called her the Orc. They did not mean it cruelly, most of them. They meant it the way you might say the weather, as a fact requiring no further consideration. Her name, the one her mother had pressed against her forehead like a kiss the morning before the fever took her, was Gruckara, 3 syllables. The third one rose slightly at the end, the way certain questions did in the old High Orcish, the ones that expected no answer but were asked anyway out of a deep and undefended hope. She had stopped correcting people sometime around her 12th year. By the time she was 24, she had learned to cook every dish a human stomach could tolerate, repair leather tack and canvas sail, set a broken bone, brew a fever tea that actually worked, and bargain in 3 trade dialects without raising her voice. She had also learned to sleep in doorways when no inn would take her coin, to patch her own wounds when no healer would touch her skin, and to smile at the precise angle that communicated harmlessness to a species that had decided she was not quite real enough to deserve the benefit of the doubt. She was very good at the smile. She had practiced it in still water until it no longer reached her eyes. The thing about Thornmere, and about every other town Gruckara had passed through in her wandering years, was not that the people there were monsters. They were not. Farmer Benwick had thrown a bread heel at her once, not to wound, but because she had looked hungry and he did not know how else to give something to a thing that made him nervous. The blacksmith's wife, Coral, had let her shelter under the forge awning during a rainstorm without being asked. Small mercies. The kind that left a person grateful and diminished in equal measure, because they were offered without expectation of reply, the way you might leave a dish of milk out for a stray. What Gruckara wanted, and she had stopped saying this aloud because the few times she had, the silence that followed was exactly the kind that a person never forgets, was a family. Not an arrangement. Not a working partnership in which 2 parties exchanged services of mutual benefit. A family, the real kind. The kind where someone remembered the specific way you took your tea and made it that way without being asked. The kind where someone touched your shoulder when you were quiet and understood that the quiet meant something. The kind of unremarkable, morning light, bread on the table ordinary that most people moved through without noticing, the way fish do not notice water. She had begun to suspect she was not allowed that. She did not frame it as complaint. Gruckara was not built for complaint. She was built, and the building had been a long, unasked-for project conducted mostly by circumstance, for endurance. She was 5 feet 11 and broad across the shoulders, with the gray-green skin of the mountain orc lineage, the lower canines that made certain humans take a half step back when she smiled, and hands large enough to palm a human skull without effort. She moved quietly for her size and spoke carefully and looked people directly in the eye because someone had once told her, not unkindly, that orcs who avoided eye contact made people assume the worst, and she had filed that information away and used it ever since. She was useful. She was polite. She took up as little space as a woman of her frame could manage. She was alone in the specific way that a person is alone when they are surrounded by others who have simply decided not to see them. The day everything changed began with a wagon wheel. Gruckara was 3 miles outside Thornmere on the East Road, heading vaguely toward the port city of Calaven, where she'd heard an apothecary was taking on anyone willing to learn, when she heard the sound, first the crack, sharp as a branch breaking, and then the long grinding collapse and the voice that came after it, which was young and male and saying words that did not appear in any of her 3 trade dialects, but conveyed their meaning clearly. The wagon had lost a rear wheel at the joint. It had tipped at the road's edge, and the crates in the bed had shifted hard left, and the young man now crouched beside it, surveying the damage, had the expression of someone doing the arithmetic of a catastrophe. He was maybe 20, built wiry and quick-looking, with the kind of face that suggested he found most things faintly amusing even when they were actively ruining his day. Human. Brown hair escaping whatever he had attempted to do with it. A squire's kit, battered and worn in ways that spoke of genuine use rather than the decorative kind. At his hip, a short blade. In his hand, the broken wheel pin, which he was regarding with the focused despair of a man who had just realized it was the only one he had. He looked up when her shadow fell across him. She watched him take her in. Watched the half-second of recalibration that humans did, the assessment, the flicker of the thing that looked like fear but was more precisely the reaction to the unfamiliar, and then the decision made by the better part of his character to override it. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about wagon wheels," he said. "I know some things about wagon wheels," Gruckera said. His name was Samton. He was a squire in service to a warrior named Camelan, who was currently in what Samton described as a situation involving a family inheritance, a lady elf, and a wizard who had apparently decided that the correct response to romantic rejection was to weaponize a dragon. He explained this in the tone of a man summarizing a sequence of events that had stopped surprising him some time ago. The crates in the wagon contained supplies for a journey of indeterminate length in an indeterminate direction, which Samton admitted was not ideal, but reflected the current state of planning. "The dragon," Gruckera said, working the wheel pin free with her knife tip. "A real one. Big one, fire breather, controlled somehow from what we understand." He handed her the spare pin that had been rolling around loose under a crate. "Lord Tensley, wizard, mean-spirited from what I've gathered. Got himself rejected by Lady Enagard, she's a cousin of his, which is its own thing, and decided everyone else should suffer for it." Gruckera looked at the pin. She looked at the wheel joint. She began threading the pin through. "Someone sent a message," she said. "A magical dragonfly. The lady. You've heard of it." "I've heard of Tensley," she had. 2 towns back there had been a couple, human man and elf woman, burned out of their home. They had shown her the wound on the man's forearm where the fire had caught the doorframe as he dove through it. The wound was deep and had not healed cleanly. She had given them the fever tea and what coin she could spare, and not said anything about the fact that they had looked slightly startled when she offered it, as if generosity from her direction was a thing that required recataloguing. "I can find my way," Samton said, but he did not sound entirely certain. "I know the East Road," Gruckera said. "I know where Tensley's fortress is rumored to be." She hammered the pin home with the heel of her palm. "I'll travel with you as far as the Greywater Fork if you want. After that, you choose." He looked at her for a moment, then he stuck out his hand. "Samton," he said, even though he had already told her his name. "Gruckera," she said. He repeated it carefully, hitting all 3 syllables, the last one rising slightly. She looked at him. "Like that," he said. "Yes," she said, "like that." She climbed up onto the wagon bench. Camelan was not what she had expected from a man whose romantic situation had triggered a cross-country quest. He was tall and earnest and possessed of a certainty about his own rightness that was almost impressive in its completeness, though she noted within the first hour that this certainty was mostly a structure he had built around a considerable amount of actual fear, and that underneath the structure he was frightened and trying hard and deeply, genuinely in love with a woman whose hand he had been told he could not have. She respected that, even when the certainty irritated her. The older brother, Ramicus, was another matter. He arrived at the camp 2 days in from Thornmere, riding a horse that looked like it had made certain calculations about its rider, and decided to tolerate him anyway. He was lean and weathered, and moved with the particular efficiency of someone who had learned a long time ago not to waste motion. His face had the controlled expression of a person who had decided humor, was the easiest thing to put between himself and the world's various attempts to wound him. He looked at Grukkara the way most people did not look at her directly, with something that was neither the half-step-back recalibration nor the studied pointedness of someone performing comfort they didn't feel. He just looked at her, the way you look at a new road, assessing terrain. "Shockdoor's looking for work," he said to his brother, by way of greeting, and then to Grukkara, "You're good with that sword." "Good enough," she said. "Good enough for what?" "For whatever this is." He almost smiled. Almost. It reached the corner of his mouth and stopped there like it was waiting for confirmation. She had known orcs. She had also known the absence of them, the specific loneliness of being the only one of your kind in a room for so long that you began to forget there had ever been a room where you were not the only one. But there was something about Ramicus, his sideways humor, his refusal of earnestness, the way he moved through the world at a slight angle to everyone else's expectations, that she recognized the shape of, even if it was built from different materials than her own. They did not talk much the first week. They did not need to. The company traveled east and then northeast, following the rumored geography of Tensley's domain, which was the kind of place a powerful and wounded man built for himself, theatrical, isolated, designed to communicate a world view. They passed through 2 towns that had been dragon-struck. In the first, a market square, the cobblestones were still black. In the second, a wedding arch made of oak boughs, still standing but scorched through, the flowers above the blackened lintel dried now, brittle, the bride's ribbon caught in the branches and moving in the wind. Grukkara stood at the edge of that second square for a long moment. "You all right?" Samton said, appearing at her elbow. "Yes," she said. And then, because Samton had the good quality of not accepting yes when he knew it was a placeholder, "I've seen this before, a few times, not dragons specifically, but someone deciding that no one else gets to have what they've been refused." She looked at the ribbon. "It tends to go on longer than people expect." "We'll stop it," he said. "I know," she said. She meant it. Not because she had any particular faith in the company's likelihood of success. The odds, reviewed honestly, were not in their favor, but because the alternative was to be someone who saw the scorched wedding arch and kept walking, and she had done enough of that. She had kept walking through too many things that asked something of her and received her back only turned away. Something in her, the part that had survived every closed door and bred heel offered like a concession, had decided that this time she would stop. They made camp 6 miles from the last town, in a hollow between 2 hills where the trees were old enough that their canopy blocked the wind. Ramicus built the fire without being asked, the way people do it when it is simply a thing they know how to do and there is nothing to make of it. Grukkara sat across from him, sharpening her knife. "Samton says you're a healer," Ramicus said. "Among other things. The healer part is useful." "Most of the parts are useful," she said, "not with heat, just the fact of it." He looked at her across the fire. I meant it as a good thing." "I know," she ran the whetstone down the blade. "People usually do," she looked up. "It's the being useful that gets tiring sometimes, as a substitute." He was quiet for a moment. The fire shifted. "For what?" he said. She considered not answering. She had not said this aloud in so long that the words felt stiff, like a muscle not used. "For being worth being around for reasons other than utility," she said. Ramicus looked at the fire. He was quiet long enough that she had decided he wasn't going to answer, which was fine. She was accustomed to her honesty landing in silence. Then he said, "When I left home the first time, I told myself I didn't need anything from anyone, that it was simpler that way." He turned the stick he had been using to stoke the fire. "Simpler, not better, just simpler." Grukkara considered that. "How long did it work?" "It's still working," he said with a half-smile again. Mostly working." She almost laughed. It surprised her, the almost of it, the proximity. She had not almost laughed in some time. "Go to sleep," she said. "You first." She did not go first. Tensley's fortress emerged from the landscape on the morning of the 10th day, as though the land itself had tried to grow something and failed, black stone rising in angles that did not agree with one another. Towers placed for statement rather than defense. The whole structure radiating the specific aesthetic of a powerful man who had decided that the world owed him an audience for his suffering. A dragon circled the highest tower in slow, mechanical loops, its movements carrying the wrong quality, not the behavior of a creature doing what it wanted, but of one doing what it had been made to do. Camelan stared up at it with the expression of someone revising their earlier optimism. "Bigger than I thought," he said. "Most things are," Ramicus said. They had a plan. It was the kind of plan that had several distinct stages, each of which depended on the previous stage going roughly as intended, which meant it was also the kind of plan that would need to be abandoned and rebuilt at least twice before the end. Gruckera had helped design it because she had the clearest tactical sense of the group, and because Samton had asked her to and no one had told him not to. She had also identified the point at which the plan was most likely to fail, which was the middle section, and suggested a contingency. The contingency was also the kind of thing that was only a contingency until the moment it became the plan. "The binding," she said, when they reviewed it the last time. "Tensley controls the dragon through a binding sigil. Break the binding, the dragon reverts to natural behavior, which means it will no longer selectively burn lovers. It will simply be a dragon doing what dragons do, which is also dangerous but much less organized." "How do we break the binding?" Samton said. "Someone has to reach the sigil room in the upper tower and destroy the marking." She looked at the fortress. "While everything else is happening." "I'll go," Camelan said immediately. "You'll be too visible," she said. "You're the one Tensley will be focused on once you announce yourself. He'll want to make a demonstration." "Ramicus then," Camelan said. Ramicus looked at her, she looked at him. "I'll need someone who knows the internal layout," he said. "I have a rough idea of the internal layout," she said. "Then we go together," he said. She had been prepared for an argument. The absence of one was brief and disorienting, like stepping from a darkened room into sudden daylight, the kind that makes you blink and reassess your previous assumptions about what seeing clearly meant. "Together," she said. They entered the fortress the way that things enter that are intended not to be noticed, quietly, from below, through the drainage channel that Gruckera had identified from the architectural logic of the black stone and the direction of the runoff staining. The channel was narrow and smelled like old water and minerals and the specific mustiness of deep stone, and Ramicus moved through it ahead of her without complaint, which she noted. The sigil room was on the 3rd level of the east tower. What she had not planned for was Tensley being inside it. He was younger than she had imagined. She had built him from the evidence of his actions, the scorch marks, the ribbon in the burned arch, the controlled dragon and its mechanical circles, and the picture she had assembled was of something older and more settled into its own malice. But Lord Tensley was perhaps 35, with the face of a person who had been told. He was exceptional for so long that the ordinary shape of his life felt like an insult, and the look he turned on them when they came through the door was not surprise so much as the offended disbelief of someone who has gone to considerable trouble to make a statement, and finds that the audience has entered through the wrong side. "An orc," he said. He said it the way people in Thornmere had said it, as a category, as a sufficient description. Gruckera looked at the sigil on the wall. It was carved into the stone at chest height, glowing a dull amber, the lines complex and layered in a way that suggested it had taken significant work to build. She felt the emanation of it from where she stood, a pressure against the air, the way a held note feels in a large room. "You can leave the girl," Tensley said to Ramicus, with the particular tone of a man who believes his contempt is a form of generosity. "What's between us isn't about." "Her name is Gruckara," Ramicus said. It was not loud. He said it the way you state a fact that is not open to debate, not the way you announce something you are prepared to defend, but the way you name a thing that exists, plain and complete, requiring no permission. The way the sun is warm, or the river runs south. Tensley looked at him. "Her name," Ramicus said again, "is Gruckara." Something in Gruckara went very still and very clear, the way still water goes clear after you stop disturbing it. She had heard her name said that way before by her mother, and by no one since. "You're serious?" Tensley said. "I'm frequently serious," Ramicus said, and moved left to draw Tensley's attention, and Gruckara moved right toward the sigil. What happened next was the kind of fight that is not beautiful, and is not theatrical, and is not the kind of thing that gets repeated properly afterward, because the people who were there are too busy surviving it to catalog it. Tensley was a powerful wizard and not a fool, and his first response to two people moving in different directions simultaneously was to choose the threat that looked more significant and apply force to it, which meant a concussive blast of energy that caught Ramicus and threw him into the far wall with a sound that Gruckara heard in her chest. She did not stop moving. He had made the calculation that orcs were muscle threat and not tactical, the same calculation that almost every person who had ever dismissed her made. She had spent 24 years on the wrong side of that calculation, watching it operate, studying its logic, identifying the precise moment at which it became exploitable. The moment it became exploitable was when the person making it committed to it. Tensley was committed. She reached the sigil and did not attempt to carve it out or paint over it or any of the magical methods she had considered. She looked at the construction of it, the way the lines converged, the single anchor point where the original binding had been set, the way that anchor was a physical groove in the stone worn smooth with use. She drove her knife into the groove at the angle of greatest stress and leveraged. The amber light screamed. It was not a sound exactly, or it was a sound in the way that certain things are sounds without being audible, felt in the back of the teeth, in the bones of the hands, in the place behind the eyes. The sigil cracked from the anchor point in 3 directions. The glow guttered. Outside and above, something that had been moving in controlled circles for a long time lurched and then veered wildly away from the tower and was simply a dragon, enormous and disoriented, and nothing to do with anyone's grief. Tensley turned. In the second that followed, while Gruckara still had her knife in the cracked stone, and Tensley had his full attention on her, and the rage of a man who has had his instrument of suffering removed by someone he had not considered significant. In that second, Ramicus, who had gotten to his feet from the wall with the careful determination of someone with at least 2 cracked ribs, hit Tensley from behind with the pommel of his sword, and Tensley went down in an unceremonious heap. The amber light went out. Gruckara let go of her knife. Her hands were shaking. She looked at them for a moment, then closed them into fists to stop it. When she opened them again, the shaking was less. Ramicus had sat down against the wall, breathing carefully in the way of a person, deciding which breaths were available and which were not. "Your ribs," she said. "I know. Let me." In a minute, he looked at her. His face was doing something she didn't have a name for. "You all right?" "I'm well," she said. "I didn't ask if you were well. I asked if you were all right." The distinction was one she had not been asked to make by anyone in a long time. She sat down on the stone floor next to him, because her legs had decided they were done contributing to events for the moment, and she thought about it. "I think so," she said. "I think I'm all right." "Good," he said. He closed his eyes. "Now the ribs." She fixed his ribs with her hands, and the contents of the kit she kept in the inner pocket of her coat, working carefully and without hurry, and he stayed still under her hands in the way of a person who has decided to trust a thing, and follows through on the decision cleanly. Outside, she could hear the sounds of the battle in the lower fortress, concluding in the particular way of battles, where the controlling wizard has been incapacitated, and the controlled dragon has abruptly ceased to cooperate, with a great deal of abrupt confusion, and then a quietness that was larger than the noise that preceded it. She rapped his ribs. He breath-tested carefully, the way you check a floor before committing your weight. "Good work," he said. "The ribs are standard," she said. "I meant the sigil." She looked at the cracked wall. The groove was cold now, the stone dark, nothing hummed. "It was a load-bearing point," she said. "Most things are. You find the load-bearing point and you address it." She paused. "Most things are not complicated. They're just not structured to make it easy for people like me to reach the point." Ramicus was quiet. "Then, what does that mean, people like you?" "Orc women," she said, "traveling alone, asking for nothing because they know the shape of what they'll get if they ask." "What would you ask for?" he said. "If the shape were different." She had thought this for years in the language of private things, thought it in the dark of inn doorways and the road silence of early mornings, and the long internal monologue of someone who has no one to think aloud to. She had never said it to another person. "A table," she said, "not mine specifically. A table someone else set that I'm also sitting at." She felt the plainness of it, how ordinary it sounded. Someone who knows what I take in my tea and makes it that way because they've paid attention. Someone for whom I'm not useful, for whom I'm just present, and that's enough. The room was quiet. "My brother," Ramicus said, "makes a very good case for love being worth the trouble. I've been listening to him make it for years without being convinced." He tilted his head back against the wall. "I'm possibly slightly more open to it now." "That's not a declaration," she said. "No," he said. "It's an invitation to a longer conversation." He looked at her. "If you're interested in the conversation." Gruckera looked at the dark wall where the amber sigil had been. She thought about the wedding arch in the second scorched town. She thought about the ribbon, the dried flowers, the way hope had a tendency to survive things that should have finished it off, which was either its greatest quality or its greatest liability, and was probably both. "I might be," she said. The conversation was slow, deliberate. It unfolded over days in which other things also unfolded. The liberation of Lady Enagard, who turned out to be not merely a rescued object, but a person with a very clear analysis of her situation and specific intentions about what she was going to do next with the rest of her life. The complex diplomacy of persuading a disoriented dragon that no one was currently interested in fighting it if it was interested in flying away, which was resolved by Camelan with unexpected patience and a great deal of livestock, and the legal and political question of what happened to Tensley, which was resolved with the kind of pragmatic efficiency that happens when there is no one left interested in maintaining a structure. Gruckera helped with all of these. She helped because she could, and because being useful was not something she intended to abandon. She liked being useful. She liked the precision of it, the way a thing worked, and you had contributed to its working. Only she intended to revise the context in which the usefulness operated. On the fourth day after the fortress, when the company had made camp in a field that smelled of rain-wet grass, and the sky had gone the specific purple of late evening that seems to exist only for a quarter hour before it becomes dark proper, she sat next to Ramicus by the fire and without preamble said, "I was born in Greyval. My mother died of fever when I was 5. My father was in the mountain campaigns, and I haven't heard from him in 14 years, and I've made a tentative peace with not knowing." She looked at the fire. "I like maps. I prefer tea to ale. I'm a better healer than I am a fighter, but I'm a better fighter than most people expect. I have a temper that I control carefully, and it emerges occasionally when I see something deeply unjust, and I do not apologize for this." She paused. "Your turn." Ramicus was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I left home at 17 because I couldn't be the older son they wanted and I didn't know yet what I was capable of being instead. I spent 8 years finding out. Some of what I found out was good, some of it I'm still sorting through. He looked at the fire. I like fighting that needs thinking. I like people who say what they mean. I don't know how to cook and Shockdoor has never let me forget it. A pause. Shockdoor, by the way, is going to like you. What makes you say that? Because he's been looking for someone who can out-argue him for 3 years, and I think you're probably it. Gruckera considered. Is that a quality he wants in someone or dreads? Both, Ramicus said. Mostly wants, it'll be fine. Shockdoor, as it turned out, was an orc. The first orc she had spoken with in 4 years. A big-shouldered bounty hunter's companion with a face that had taken some damage over the years, and a voice like gravel finding its level, and a laugh that could be heard from a considerable distance. He appeared on the 5th day, having tracked the company from the fortress, and he regarded Gruckera with the directness of someone who does not build preamble and does not require it. You broke the binding, he said. Yes. Good, he sat down. The stew smells like it needs more salt. It has adequate salt, she said. Orc palates require more. Orc palates, she said, have been using adequate as a synonym for not enough for so long that they've lost calibration. Shockdoor stared at her. Then he laughed the considerable laugh and said to Ramicus, I like her. I know, Ramicus said. She added the salt. She did it without making anything of it. Shockdoor ate 3 bowls and said nothing further about the salt, which was, she had learned long ago, the highest form of culinary compliment available from people who would not simply say a thing was good. Camelan married his elf princess on a morning in early autumn, in a clearing chosen because it had neither a magical significance nor an architectural grandeur, but simply good light, the kind that comes at the specific angle of a morning that has decided to be unreservedly warm. The arch they used was pine boughs wound with the last of the season's flowers, pale and stubborn in the cooling weather, and the ribbon used to bind their hands was a deep green, the color of the old-growth forest to the east, and Camelan cried at the 3rd sentence of the vows and did not attempt to disguise this. Gruckera stood at the edge of the assembly. She had dressed carefully. Not with vanity, she had a limited repertoire on that front, but with the deliberateness of someone who understood that a thing worth witnessing deserved a witness who had made an effort. Her coat was brushed, her boots were clean, her hair was bound in the triple braid of the mountain orc tradition, which her mother had taught her, and which she wore on days that felt like they deserved the weight of continuity. Ramicus appeared beside her. He stood close enough that their shoulders were nearly touching, which was a proximity that had become, over the weeks since the fortress, a language of its own, one that said I am here, and does not require further elaboration. You're crying, he said quietly. I'm not, she said. There is water on your face. It's atmospheric, she said. He almost smiled. She had been studying the almost smile for weeks now, cataloging its variations. This one was the soft one, the private one, the one that was not for performance. I want, he said, equally quietly, to find a place to settle, not forever necessarily, but for a while, long enough to know what it feels like to stay somewhere. He was looking at the ceremony. I think I'd like that. I think I've been moving so long I've forgotten to check whether I wanted to stop. She looked at his profile. The morning light was doing things to it that she did not examine too carefully. What would stopping look like, she said. A table, he said, probably someone who knows what I take in my tea. He paused. Someone worth building the kind of ordinary things that people build when they've decided to stay. Gruckera was quiet. Below them, Camelan and Lerk were being pronounced joined in the ancient words, the ones that had been pronounced so many times over so many years that they had worn smooth and simple, like a stone on a riverbed, not impressive, not dramatic, just worn into a shape that fit perfectly in the hand. Gruckera, Ramicus said. not the way people in Thornmere had said it, not as a category or a placeholder or a thing that required no further consideration. 3 syllables, the third one rising slightly, the way certain questions did, the ones that expected no answer but were asked anyway out of a deep and undefended hope. She had waited for someone to say her name like that for 24 years. Yes, she said just that. In the valley below the clearing, the dragon, unbound now, uncurled from its circuits, doing simply what it wanted, banked slowly over the tree line in the morning light, its scales catching the sun in the way that large and ancient things catch light, incidentally, without effort or intention, simply by existing at the right angle to the world. Nobody ran. Nobody flinched. A few people looked up and then looked back at the ceremony, where the important thing was happening. Gruckara looked up at it for a moment. She thought about what it was to be released from a binding you had not chosen, and had not known was binding you, until the moment it gave way. She thought about the amber light going out and the silence after, the way the pressure lifted, and the air felt different, wider, possible. She thought about a table set with 2 cups. You realize, she said, that Shockdoor will have opinions about where we settle. Shockdoor has opinions about everything, Ramicus said. It's one of his qualities. He'll want to be nearby. He can be nearby. And Samton will need somewhere to bring dispatches from Camelan, who will write constantly because he's that kind of person. He is absolutely that kind of person, Ramicus agreed. So it won't be quiet, she said. No, he said, probably not. She looked at the dragon one more time. It had risen high now, above the tree line, above the clearing, into the blue-white of the upper morning, and from this distance it was a shape rather than a specific terror, a large thing moving through a larger space, doing what it was built to do in the absence of anyone's grief or compulsion. Good, she said. She meant it the same way she had meant "we'll stop it," not as a declaration of certainty, but as a statement of intent, aimed not at a particular listener, but at the fact of the world itself, the way certain things are said not because someone needs to hear them, but because the act of saying them makes them more real. Below them, the assembly was beginning to disperse toward the tables where the food had been set. Samton was already there, inefficiently attempting to balance 2 plates. Lady Anagard, who had spent her first 3 days of freedom organizing the logistics of the fortress's former prisoners with an efficiency that made Camelan look faintly intimidated, was now laughing at something the elf princess had said, her hair loose for the first time, her posture the posture of someone who has finally been allowed to take up their full space. Shockdoor was standing at the salt. If he salts my cooking again, Gruckara said, I'm going to have a conversation with him about it. He'll enjoy the conversation, Ramicus said. I know, she said. I'll enjoy it too. She walked down the slope toward the table, and he walked beside her, and the morning opened around them the way mornings do when you are finally in the right place, which is the way they have always opened. The same light, the same warmth, the same unremarkable and irreplaceable fact of a day beginning, but received now by someone who has decided to be present for it. The table had been set by many people, and the food had been made by several of them, and none of it was specifically hers or specifically his, but all of it was available to both of them. And when she sat down and Samton poured her tea, too weak, but made by someone who was trying, she thought of her mother's hands on her forehead, and the name she had been given, and the way 3 syllables could carry 24 years of a particular kind of waiting, and she picked up her cup. The tea needed more time to steep. She waited for it, she was in no hurry. She had all the time there was.